Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Data Resiliency Moves to the Cloud, featuring Forrester. Today's event is brought to you by Druva and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is David Davis, and I'm excited to be your moderator on today's event. Now, before we get started, we have a little bit of housekeeping that we first need to cover. We want this to be an educational webinar, so we encourage you to use the questions box there in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the event. We also have a number of handouts that you can download there in the GoToWebinar control panel as well. You'll find the CIO's Guide to Cloud-First Data Protection, as well as the Definitive Guide to Enterprise Data Backup and Recovery Architectures. You'll find the Forrester Wave on Data Resiliency Solutions for 2019. And finally, you'll find the Egan case study on how Egan replaced Veeam with Druva to save more than 50% time and effort. So make sure that you click on the Handouts tab in the GoToWebinar control panel to download all of those PDF assets. And finally, you should know that after the Q&A session at the very end of the event today, we'll be awarding an Amazon $300 gift card to one lucky attendee on the live event. If you're watching this event on demand, I'm sorry, the drawing has already occurred. Prize terms and conditions can be found on our website, events.actualtechmedia.com. Now, on the webinar today, you'll hear from Mr. Mike Palmer, Chief Product Officer at Druva, as well as Naveen Chhabra, Senior Analyst at Forrester Research. And with that, take it away, Mike.
Hi. And first of all, thank you everybody for taking the time to discuss and to understand more about this important topic. As we see our customers and the market in general increasingly adopting the cloud for a variety of use cases, transforming their current data center architectures to a more cloud-friendly one, data resiliency has become front and center as one of those opportunities to make the transformation. I'm really pleased to be joined today by Naveen Chhabra. Naveen, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi everyone on the call. This is Naveen Chhabra. I'm a senior analyst with the Infrastructure and Operations Research Group here at Forrester, and I lead the coverage on a few topics including data resiliency, disaster recovery, and storage.
Excellent, and thank you for joining us today, Naveen. I, of course, am the Chief Product Officer here at Druva and responsible for setting the vision and making it real for our enterprise customers to leave decades of legacy solutions and adopt a more agile, a more cost-effective, and frankly, a more forward-looking set of strategies for both data protection and ways to leverage that data into the future. But let's get a little background on this market. Naveen spends his full day every day looking at the trends in the space, the providers that are facilitating movement within those trends, as well as enterprise requirements. So Naveen, I'm going to hand it to you first as we talk through what Forrester has to say about data protection in the cloud era. Of course, we're going to follow a little bit with Druva's perspective and then take some Q&A from the attendees before we wrap up. So Naveen, I'm going to hand it to you. Let's hear Forrester's point of view.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, Mike, so much, and thanks for all the attendees on this webinar. We'll ensure you get something, some takeaways from this webinar today. You may be thinking about this data resiliency. What does that mean, and how is that relevant to you all attendees today? And what is it that you would do with this? How does it impact you in your daily lives? You are certainly aware of the data protection, backup, recovery as the key terms that have been prevalent in the industry for quite some time. And the reason I'm trying to give a new, different approach, a new way of thinking about things, is because of various market forces, the developments that are happening in the market overall. And my way of kind of conveying what I mean by data resiliency is very simple. Look at this chart here and you find that a business service is composed of these three elements: infrastructure, application, and data. And while we are developing the architecture for both applications and infrastructure so that those components and elements are resilient, but we do not look at data in the same light. And that calls for a different view of thinking because of the tremendous pressure that business is in terms, IT is in terms of delivering 24/7 services back to business and all other stakeholders. While I say that, there are few tenets of data resiliency that I would certainly introduce to you and take you through to be able to, complete the circle. With that, moving to the next slide, I just want to highlight, and this is to kind of level set on what are the different type of sources, data sources that organizations today have to deal with, and what are the different target locations, data backup target locations that organizations have to deal with, have to manage today. And the sources, if you were to kind of focus on, are all on the lower left side of this picture. It says sources of data. We are, as organizations, dealing with the data sources that are resident not just in private cloud, within the data center, but we are also dealing with data that's resident in public cloud services. Different public cloud service providers that we consume today. The data is also resident in a number of SaaS services that also require the same level of protection that the on-prem or IaaS hosted data would require. Now, there are a plethora of options, a variety of options available in terms of protecting the data or keeping the data protected data location, which is you could have that data living in the public cloud, storage services from public cloud providers. You could keep that on site, on tapes, on object storage, and so on and so forth. Now, think of the myriad of options that are available. While the options are good from a flexibility standpoint, but it also throws up a significant challenge in terms of what are the possible options that you have as infrastructure and operations leaders, the options that you can exercise today to take the most efficient and effective choices for your organization. And while I think these options are good in terms of having that flexibility, you have to also deal with in what situation and circumstance do I use a particular model? In what circumstance do I go out and move my data to the public cloud? Has it to do with only the cost efficiencies, or can it also improve my SLAs that I have signed up to support my business? Now, as I see, one of the frontiers of moving up to data resiliency would be a policy management framework that will define where you put the data corresponding to the business SLAs that you have signed up, corresponding to all the stakeholder requirements that you are up to serve. All the data decisions have to be policy-led, defined by the policies, executed by the policies. And while policy management is kind of becoming prominent in these days in terms of defining, the backups, the schedules, the sources and the targets and the combination of that, but I think we have to go a step forward in terms of also looking at policies from the contemporary requirements standpoint. Now, let me give you an example. In the business, the data volume, velocity, and the variety of data that organizations are dealing with today continue to change at a rapid pace. What that means is that your policy that may have been effective 6 months or a year back may or may not be equally effective today. Now, as leaders, as infrastructure and operation leaders, you have to keep a continuous tab on, are those policies effective in today's time. And you have to, then look at the policy effectiveness as a key metric of defining the success of your data. Now, just to exemplify that a little further, let's say you're a news broadcasting agency, news broadcasting company. You have tons and tons of video data that you feed up, have to live feed into the program. Let's say if there was a new major news announcement, that came out, and you have to bring the right data snippets, the video asset from let's say a couple of years back, and if you had a specific policy that was defined 2 years back and which was to put all the data into the tape, guess what? In today's requirement, the stakeholders have unsatiated needs. They want services to be available at the fingertips. So given that situation, if the data is resident in the tape, the backup and the archives are resident in the tape, there is no way you can bring those video assets out in like seconds or minutes to be able to serve that news feed live and in context. Now, that is what I mean by, when I say, effectiveness of policies. Your policies may have been defined, and those would have been serving, couple of years back, but may not be effective today. So you have to keep a continuous tab on what those policies mean and how are those policies serving your business requirements today. One of the other movements in the industry that I've been tracking very closely has been the impact of ransomware, impact of cyber attacks on organizations, where organizations are caught unprepared and they tend to lose data. They tend to lose not just control of data, but they lose data. And the recent examples that we have seen, tend to signify the importance of having a close control on your data assets. Let me bring this example of this company called Norsk Hydro, which was attacked by a ransomware, in the second or third week of March. The impact of the ransomware on this organization was such that 3.5 months into the ransomware attack, the organization was not prepared to go back to their IT systems, and the significant impact was that the quarterly financial results were not declared by the company in time, right? While that's an impact that organization faces, there are other examples wherein medical practices have closed their shops because they do not have access to data. Now, taking this back to the notion of business services where data is an essential component, while you could have the IT infrastructure ready, you could bring the alternate IT infrastructure from different providers, but data is your own asset, and which requires the same level of resiliency as the application and infrastructure would. So in that light, while through this picture, I just want to explain the notion of recovering data from different snapshots or different point in time to which you can potentially go back to, but each of these options represent a significant loss to business. And ransomwares are an experience today which typically tend to live in an organization's IT environment and live off the radar, for months together. And the recent example that we have seen in the industry was Bayer, this German pharma and this German conglomerate Bayer, where the IT team declared publicly that they had a ransomware living in its IT environment for 15 months at a stretch. Now, what that means is that you can potentially, technically go back to any point in time, backup copies to recover from, but it is highly likely that all the systems that you want to recover, which were infected, and if you were to recover from any point in time which is shown in the yellow zone in the picture, those backup instances and copies would also be infected. That means if you instantiate using those backup instances, your recovered systems would also come under an attack pretty soon. Now, the other option is for you to find out which are the clean, uninfected copies of data that may be, 15 months back. Now, the challenges that organizations face are not all the data is kept for, that long in its archive. Technically possible, you could always keep that data, but then the other significant business risk that you undertake by recovering from a point in time that is shown in this picture in the green color is the loss of business transactions, right? So one way to understand that is, let's say you are a banking organization or a financial services organization, and if you were to recover from any of the data points that's shown in the green color here, which demonstrates clean and uninfected copies, and hypothetically, let's assume even if the data point is 3 days old, right? Now, we all understand that the number of transactions a typical bank would witness in 3 days' time. So any loss of transactional data can potentially lead to unlimited liabilities to the financial services firms. And now this means, when look at the effect of ransomware and the risks that are different type of risk organizations would have to face by just recovering from different snapshots, point-in-time copies, is that we would have to look at alternate ways. We would have to look at newer technologies, newer models, newer processes to be able to ensure that the data is as resilient as the business applications and infrastructure, so that we can continue to deliver those services back to the business and the stakeholders 24/7. The third element and the next element of data resiliency that I want you to get rewired with is a thought around what is the raison d'etre of backup? Why does backup exist? And my single answer to that is so that businesses can recover. However, let me also state that the irony today that I see in most of the organizations that I deal with is that stakeholders do not have any visibility into how recoverable is the data and the infrastructure, right? I would focus solely here on the data. The organizations do not have visibility into the recoverability. If I were to give an attribute to that, recoverability is unknown to organizations. And that is what I would say is one of the elements that would give you a future direction about the possible progress that you can make. That's a probabilistic view of how recoverable as an organization you may be. There are different factors that impact recoverability. I would not go into that at this time, but I'm happy to kind of have a follow-on discussion. But recoverability across different data sets, across applications, and across enterprises is one of the elements that I would highly recommend organizations to start developing. It's easier said than done, but that's one way you could be better prepared in terms of handling all the possible outages, data loss, and other DevOps kind of requirements that business comes up to the infrastructure and operations professionals with. Now, how do I in all the discussions that I have had, I have always been challenged with giving them a clear understanding of what recoverability means, and how do you visualize recoverability. And I think it's important for us to understand why do we need it, and then I will also get into how do you develop that and what does it mean. So the way I think about recoverability is that business and the stakeholders would never come back to you wishing that wish you a speedy recovery. And whenever you lose data or there is an outage, the business doesn't come to wish you good luck, but the business expects that infrastructure and operations group teams would recover as soon as possible, right? And that's where if infrastructure and operation professionals have that visibility into the recoverability, you would be able to confidently tell the business stakeholders about how soon, what are the possible risks, what are the possible data losses that you may witness. One of the essential characteristics of recoverability is visibility, and this is how I explain that to you, to my audience. Consider an aircraft which has to take off, and we all know by our experiences that if there is not enough visibility on the runway, the airplanes are not allowed to take off, right? Think of this. This is an analogous situation to where the infrastructure teams are, when it comes to recovery. If I do not have enough visibility into my state of backup, state of data, if I have visibility, I can confidently take off and confidently recover, confidently deliver services back to the business. In contrast, if I do not have visibility, my confidence simply goes down. I am propagating this notion of recoverability as one of the essential characteristics and elements of or tenets of data resiliency is because of the industry movements. Overall in the industry, you would find that there are digital transformation projects, organizations in different industries, different geographies are trying to undertake new projects that can help them either develop new ways to engage with customers or to develop new ways that they can optimize their existing processes or existing organizational and technologies that they use. So one of the examples here is, let's say you are in a logistics industry and you want to the executives want to undertake autonomous vehicles as one of the ways to optimize their own business processes and the cost and ensure they deliver better services to the clients. And that's happening. That's for real. It's not a hypothetical example. The organizations that have come together, like Embark, Frigidaire, and Ryder, they have opened up a 650-mile automated freight route between Texas, their factory locations, and the distribution centers in California. Now, what this means is that you are looking at a collaboration of different companies, not just from a business process standpoint, but also from the underlying technology standpoint. Frigidaire doesn't have the technology that Embark and Ryder provides with, and hence it depends on them to be able to deliver this, to have an autonomous freight route, working for them. Look at the entry cases. If for any reason, any of the underlying services, whether the business critical service that's running, like SAP systems within your data center, if those are not available for any reason, versus if any of the geo-navigational services that are provided by third-party providers like Google, right, are not available to Embark or Ryder, the trucks, the autonomous vehicles would be either inoperational, or if those are already on the roads, it can lead to fatalities because the trucks would not know which direction to go, how far, what speed, and what not. So if the navigational services on which you are dependent on a third-party service provider, those are not available, your services are unavailable, and essentially it can lead to significant business liability. So look at the chain, right? Now, you're not, as IT professionals, while you are responsible for continuous delivery of IT services within your enterprise, but you have to also coordinate with different service providers, different IT organizations across, partner organizations. Now, you cannot live with disjoint technologies not supporting the ultimate objective and the goal of the organization. So you have to have all the services running in tandem, closely working with each other, not just because you are providing services to your business, but also to your business partners, right? And these are the level of complex enterprise deployments that we see are gaining importance day by day. Now, thinking of this from the data resiliency standpoint, you must be able to deliver services non-stop 24/7 to all the parties involved. So much so that I tend to think if these services, with the kind of nature of requirements that we see in the industry, our traditional ways of thinking about few hours of RTO, few hours of RPO, those are under significant pressure and under tremendous challenge, because the business would certainly come back and would challenge those existing practices and processes that we have adopted so far. So looking at it from that perspective, we must have, much like the infrastructure and application resiliency, we must be aiming for data resiliency as well. So to be able to contribute and deliver back to the business and, still have that trusted partner get that response back from the business that we always aim for. Let me share with you, while I, talked about some of the tenets and the capabilities, essential capabilities that I see are important from the data resiliency standpoint. I was fortunate enough to work with a number of, vendors in the marketplace and led this evaluation of various data resiliency solutions. And I'm glad to share with you the overall results of that study, which are in front of you. Take a moment to read through this, and I will pass the baton over to Mike for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Naveen. I appreciate your insights. We're going to take this through the rest of the webinar is talking a little bit more specifically around some of the data points and some of the market drivers in the tech space that are affecting users' decisions and how to transform their data protection policies. There's a great phrase that I think those that are into the transformation of technology use, and that is, if we want things to remain the same, everything needs to change. And what Naveen reminds us of is if our requirements remain the same, and those requirements are visibility into data, accessibility of data, the reliability of the restoration of data, the ability to recover in the event of a catastrophe or even an operational error, everything is going to need to change. It's going to need to change because our data sources are diversifying. I think Naveen covered that pretty well, talking about the cloud or SaaS applications or even the architectures of our core data center products. The threats are changing. Ransomware has made its presence on the scene from a security standpoint in a way that was unheard of 10 years ago. So therefore, the requirements have changed. Access and the need to use data has changed. As Naveen described in the newsroom broadcast scenario, what once could have sat on tape for a long period of time for the eventuality of a catastrophe is now a valuable asset that should be called upon on demand for use. So again, we have to think about the same requirements, but we have to completely rethink the way that we're delivering those requirements. This has been fairly prevalent if we've looked into the evolution of our own data center architectures. When we had bare metal, we created restoration techniques like bare metal restore. We moved to virtual machines, and often we diversified our data protection strategies when we did that. As we look forward and we hear more about containers, either containers built on premises or containers that you can register in the cloud or across clouds, or functional architectures like Lambda services, that enterprises have looked at their requirement sets and found new ways, new architectures, and frankly, new suppliers in order to service those needs. We know that many companies are using a multitude of suppliers today in order to realize their fundamental requirements of access, visibility, and recoverability. Now, some of the market trends underpinning these changes, we think, are illustrative of why we're seeing more and more movement to the cloud. ESG will tell you that in a pretty wide survey of CIOs asking what's the largest opportunity they have for cost savings in their current premises data center, storage consolidation is the top of the list. Those of you that are practitioners know inefficient storage, including silos, including the inability to use all of your usable disk space, and then the entire practice of refresh and migration has made it very, very hard to really optimally use disk-based storage on premises. And so we've built hierarchical storage management techniques to move data from one tier to the next, eventually to tape, all in a pursuit of lower costs and better optimized use of our resources. At the same time, the cloud over the last 10 years has really changed the game when it comes to cost management. In the last 5 years alone in AWS, there's been a 60% CAGR decrease in the cost of storage per terabyte. Think about that in a world of data growth. It explains why by 2021, we will see that public cloud storage will overtake premises storage spend for the first time ever. This will fuel yet further price declines and more data migration to the cloud, again in pursuit of a more cost-optimized and a more flexible storage architecture. That, of course, will be somewhat facilitated by the applications themselves as enterprises look to shrink their data centers, in particular to close secondary data centers and build more and more native architecture. You take these trends and you are rethinking some of the ways in which pursuit of more cost optimization and more recoverability can be served in the cloud at the same time while you're transforming your premises architectures. But there are some additional trends as well, and they sit inside your own teams. Gartner will tell you that 40% of IT administrators will be what are called versatilists in the coming years. A versatilist, of course, is someone that has moved away from a deep specialty in a single particular business process like backup or like storage administration. That, of course, will put more pressure on them to understand more technologies. It will also take time away from them as they have to diversify their daily activities and the kind of administration they're capable of doing or willing to do. If we look forward, we're also looking to reinvest our money. We're not trying to hire more backup administrators, even as our petabytes of storage grows. We are trying to hire more data analysts. We're trying to take advantage of that growth of data, of the diversity of the data sources that Naveen mentioned earlier, so that we can gain better insights into our own businesses, our employees, and our customers. And then last but not least, the demands put on that data, even from a liability point of view, are growing substantially. Most Western countries will have some form of data privacy regulation, and they are now backing it up with fines. So we're at the point where we're sitting on large data sets and growing ones, and while we are trying to cost optimize, which in the premises world has meant ultimately putting data to tape, we're required now to search that data in a fairly real-time way, if not also act upon that search by doing things like masking data or even deleting it upon request. So we start to see why, while our requirements may be the same, that our techniques need to change substantially. And this sets up really a justification for why the cloud is your next use case transformation from storage and backup architectures in the premises data center ultimately to that cloud. First of all, they allow you to build and adopt faster. SaaS products are known to move faster when it comes to feature development. They are seamless upgrades and releases. They do not require patching. They solve a lot of that administration problem that I mentioned before. Similarly, they escape this ineffective and inefficient use of storage silos. Why? Ultimately because you're paying for only the storage capacity that you're consuming at any given time. You move away from the idea of ownership of perpetual licensing. You are able to grow to larger volumes, but you're also able to manage your data retention so you can also decrease your data volumes. So for the first time, rather than owning inefficiently used license capacity or disk, you're able to move with your business requirements. And as your business expands, or as your compliance requirements require more localization of data, you can now do this and deploy cloud-based infrastructure at the same per unit cost across the world. No longer will there be a hurdle rate to build a new data center in a particular country to service that local need. And that last but not least, because we're removing a lot of these requirements of building that new data center, or going through the annual refresh cycle, or the upgrades, the patching, the integrations, we're now get to a place where our staff and their time and their talents can be leveraged more broadly and more in alignment with the core competencies and the needs of the business. This time, of course, will move away from daily administration activities that are frustrating both for them as well as put pressure on your finances. So let's talk about those fundamental requirements. And they do almost always start with security, because policy enforcement is difficult. Naveen talked about the restore policies, but they also include the data retention policies. Is my data encrypted at rest? Is it encrypted in flight? Who has access to my data? How do I recover from a ransomware situation where I potentially have data that's in my backup environment sitting on the same network where the attack is being experienced? That would mean that my entire data path is exposed and my recoverability options go away. Similarly, with storage, how do we move away from time-consuming capacity planning, refresh cycles, colocation expansion as we have to bring in new arrays, integrations of new tiers of storage, or the difficulty and the risk around basic operational activities like upgrades and all of the coordination with the business units that are required, emergency patching for security vulnerabilities. How do we move to a world where data storage and performance is optimized by machine learning, and data moves to the tier at which it performs best for the price I'm willing to pay? And also in a world where I can keep that in a safe environment, both encrypted, but also separate from my primary application environments, so I do have a recovery point that's secured. And how do I move away from data silos in pursuit of the idea of data search and data access to the wider population at my business and even my partners? How do I extend the unique data set that I have so that we can come to better conclusions about the behavior of my company or my customer base? How do we provide unified access? How do we provide roles-based access controls and visualization? Ultimately, better governance, because we can do those things. And if I'm doing this in the cloud, which solves many, if not all of these problems, how do we avoid the variable cost risk, the famous put charges and the egress charges? How do we create consistent pricing so that I can use my data knowing that my price remains what I budgeted for when I went on this transformation journey? And last but not least, we know that compliance requirements are going to change, and we know that compliance is not just about how I produce my report, but how fast I can produce my report to show that my business is operating effectively in the regulatory environment. How do we enable search? How do we enable pre-canned reporting? How do we do things like search for personally identifiable information and quickly understand across all of the data stored, regardless of the tier that it's sitting at, what I'm retaining and how I'm managing it? Tools need to change if these requirements remain the same. And all of this in a world where we're hearing that data is the new oil, it's the new gold, it's the new valuable asset. And that's not just about retaining at that point. It's about being able to understand the data. It's about being able to take action on that data. But this is a two-sided story. If data in itself is an asset, it brings along liabilities along with opportunities. And when there are liabilities and when there are opportunities, there are those that want to steal those opportunities from you. In this past year, there have been a 500% increase in ransomware attacks alone just in the first quarter of the calendar year 2019. The exposure from cyber threats and increased requirements for government controls and regulatory reporting has increased alongside that, as you would imagine. As risks increase, so will the controls placed on them. And many of these costs are hidden, and many of them hit the mid-market business segment the most. Those companies that either have the least ability to pay for sophisticated and large teams, or fewer resources from government agencies or others that help track down the bad guys, are the ones that ultimately have to pay the ransomware costs the soonest. And they don't get the most press, but they are certainly the most victimized. And while they're trying to create protections against ransomware, there's also a need to reinvest in business continuity, outdated infrastructure, or the ability to support underutilized secondary data centers are not a path to success for any segment of the market. And at the same time, these specific laws, where they're the California Data Protection Acts, where there's GDPR in Europe, or others coming along, data governance has created not just new requirements, but even new roles inside of companies in the form of chief data officers, who themselves now have requirements placed on IT. You can see some of the tactical examples for this world, and while at some level humorous, also terrifying. There are even businesses called ransomware as a service. These are examples of companies who are literally creating ransomware attacks and selling that capability to third parties who want to attack your business. This is a real example from earlier this year. This was not made up by Druva, or certainly not by Forrester. And in fact, this is a company that opened shop in May and closed in June after stealing its own ransomware company's money. This is how insidious the problem has gotten. But let's not forget that while there are risks, we're here because there are more opportunities. We've heard about the opportunity of a data lake. And the opportunity around a data lake starts with the question, where's my largest, most diverse data set? Because that data set is where I'm most likely to find the hidden conclusion, the hidden insight into what's going on in my marketplace. But if we're going to do that, we need to find that data set. And we here at Druva argue that your most diversified and maybe your only single silo where data from all of your applications resides is in that secondary data set called backup. But if you want to leverage it, you also want to have on-demand resourcing. You want to have the ability to scale with your analytics exercise, and you want to be able to cease paying for that scale when you're not using it. This has prevented most companies from investing in the mythical data lake on premises, because building large compute farms and creating new storage silos is exactly the opposite of what companies have been trying to do. But reinforce why combining the benefit of scale and compute in the cloud with your most diverse data set, also servicing a fundamental backup need in the cloud, opens doors to new opportunities as you move to a backup as a service capability. All of this being actioned more easily through subscription models, through APIs to third-party partners. In Druva's case, we enable our customers to act and react and control data through many applications, including ServiceNow or Splunk or various ransomware and e-discovery tools, so that all of these business processes in the cloud can be orchestrated seamlessly end-to-end. And if you ask customers, do they recognize the value of the shift to SaaS and the shift to cloud, they will talk to you about all of these challenges, the immense growth in data, and in particular in unstructured data coming from IoT applications, or the video examples that Naveen mentioned to us earlier, but of course alongside the growth in traditional data, which we also want to analyze. And if you ask, how are you going to deal with this growth challenge? The answer increasingly is, I'm going to adopt SaaS as my model. I'm moving to the cloud because I want to scale my resources directly in line with my needs. How do I do that? As we said earlier, we want to do that through effective management. We want simplicity. We want to see our data end to end. What we're showing here is an example of our own interface where you're able to see data at every storage tier, whether that storage tier starts in warm recovery options that are designed for fast RTOs through long-term recovery options where you need to store data for months and years with less frequent access. This is where we can go back to an example that Naveen gave us earlier. Companies that have had ransomware exposure, malware installed on their infrastructure, but didn't manifest itself for 12 to 15 months. For many companies, that sits outside the retention policies. Either that sits on tape, which is very difficult to recover, if not time-consuming, maybe even impossible to do versioning of software, or maybe just deletes after anywhere between 3 months and 12 months, and now they have to rebuild their systems from scratch. In the cloud, we're helping customers intelligently tier data from S3 to S3IA to Glacier to Deep Archive So they get the same cost benefits, but the same visibility that Naveen referred to, the same accessibility to the data, the same predictability and understanding of what the recoverability timeframe is, where that data is, not just by tier, but also by geography. So here we have simplicity of visualization, simplicity of access, a clear understanding of recoverability options, and an understanding of what that RTO is going to look like. When you take all of these same requirements of visibility and access and recovery and cost savings, and you combine them with the power of cloud and SaaS, you get quite quickly to an understanding that in other workflow areas, companies have solutioned for, whether they were in the application space, with companies like Salesforce that we've all adopted today, companies that we would never think that we would otherwise compete with by building our own premises CRM applications, for example. We've moved our development tools. Our whole DevOps infrastructure is now a tool chain that is largely cloud-based. And we're seeing the same in database. Why has that not happened yet in data protection? And Dhruva would argue, as the fastest growing partner inside the storage area for partners like Amazon and others, that companies are increasingly seeing the benefits that I've mentioned earlier as we deliver data protection set of requirements. How are we helping you? We're taking those VMs, that NAS infrastructure, your databases, your Hyper-V, and we're able to take that premises workload, move it through caching on premises to the cloud, which gives you your selection of restore points, which gives you near data center performance when it comes to recovery options, gives you embedded disaster recovery, the ability to move an application itself from premises to cloud, and do all of that while providing you immediate cost savings through cloud storage tiering, leveraging that decline in cloud storage pricing that I mentioned earlier, but also improving visibility, improving access, and making the data more usable, ultimately speaking for your next generation business requirements like analytics. But you don't have to take it from me. This is a customer of Dhruva that was kind enough to co-present with us recently at VMworld, showing that from the first minute that they adopted the Dhruva SaaS offering, they had immediately a 14% savings in the total cost of their ownership compared to their current backup solution. As they adopted disaster recovery and retired their disaster recovery stack, that leapt to 42% savings based on their previous solution. And as now they start to tier into long-term retention and move away from tape, but increase search and visibility for their internal business units, while they're improving their business posture with data, they're actually reducing their cost of ownership by 70%. All of this, including the business resiliency aspects that Naveen mentions, gets reflected not just in backup and restore, but through full application recovery scenarios. Automated discovery, one-click failover and fail back to the premises, all embedded into the same SaaS platform. So here we see as we move to the cloud, we don't just service the core data protection requirement. We're able to layer on what were otherwise yet further software and hardware stacks on premises and embed them as simple application services over the top of the same copy of data. I could extend this example to e-discovery, to archive, to compliance management, to ransomware recovery, and other services here at Dhruva, as SaaS inevitably takes over for difficult to manage and costly software stacks on premises. We recently announced our intelligent tiering capabilities, as I mentioned earlier, providing customers with substantial savings as we, through machine learning capabilities, understand what blocks of data are used and unused, and we can move those blocks of data to cheaper storage while still making them visible and accessible to you and to your application over time. You, of course, can work with us to set minimal and max policies in our interfaces to achieve this, but here you finally see a path to retiring that tape infrastructure that prevented you from leveraging data while offering you savings. Here we combine the two. And the coverage goes beyond there. Naveen started his discussion by talking about the diversity of data sources. And while I have focused much of my conversation here today on premises workloads like VMware and databases and NAS, of course they are true of native applications like Office 365, Salesforce, and Slack, or native applications built in AWS itself, servicing data protection requirements on EC2 or EBS or S3. all unified into that single same platform. And of course, as I've mentioned, enable ransomware recovery on top of this. A SaaS platform replaces your air-gapped tape requirement with data that was encrypted from source to storage, where you own the key. So there's the combination of protection from even us as a supplier at Druva, where we don't see your data, but we've also protected you from yourselves because we are not sitting on your network and we avoid the ability of a ransomware attacker to come through your network to go after your secondary data. So there are clear SaaS advantages. We bend the curve on savings when we adopt the cloud. Year over year, per terabyte storage savings is not something most premises companies are used to relying on. We deliver it. And we deliver it on only the stored data. We don't charge on front-end terabyte pricing, where you're paying for data that's coming into your system before it's been processed, before it's been deduplicated, and before it's been compressed. We cover the puts and egresses to make that charge in the cloud predictable, and then tier it into long-term storage so that you are able to take advantage of low-cost archive pricing while still having accessibility and visibility into the data. We cover your workloads from premises to SaaS to native cloud-built applications, and we make it easy. We tell our customers a novice Druva user can deploy a backup in 15 minutes or less. There's no certification program, no need to do an upgrade, no patching, all in a single pane of glass, which provides you value on demand. We deliver services weekly and bi-weekly with new features, 160 releases in the same period that an average enterprise customer takes to upgrade just one time with a legacy software provider. And as I've mentioned, we do all of this with the world's best security, not just an air-gap capability to replace tape, but a certified one with encryption end-to-end. And all of this, by the way, setting up the ability to make a diverse, large, and growing data set available not just in a cost-effective way, but in an access way in that data lake environment in the cloud that most companies we know are aspiring to. We're one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing data protection provider today, with over 4,000 customers built natively in AWS, with more than 150 petabytes under management, and some of the best logos and most familiar logos to you in the industry trusting us. We've been recognized and thank Forrester for spending time with us today. This is a fast-moving industry. We count on our analyst partners to keep you, the customer, apprised of what new capabilities are available to you as your architecture needs change, even as your requirements for those core aspects of recoverability, visibility, and accessibility stay the same. We think that getting a demo with us, starting a very easy to manage POC in 15 minutes, and using our online TCO tools will help you understand how practically we can bring these benefits to you. With that said, I'm going to look to our webinar question page, address a little bit with Naveen, and spend just a couple minutes making sure that any questions that our audience has had are covered. And as I look through this, Naveen, I'm going to actually start with a question for you, if you don't mind. Simple question. What are some of the most common mistakes that you see companies making today with their data?
Some of the challenges that I see organizations still face are around lack of visibility that I highlighted through my presentation. There is no way organizations do not have a composite or comprehensive view of the data, and they don't know the data that corresponds to a given business application. So while I understand organizations have a tiered classification of applications from a criticality and sensitivity perspective, but there is very little capability on their side, very little effort in terms of mapping what data maps to which application and how the protection should happen. That is one of the significant challenges that I see. The other significant challenge in the recent times is around the capability to manage it from protect it from ransomware. Not because they don't want to, but there is lack of preparedness while there are few technologies that are currently available, and these are not new technologies per se, the technologies that already existed in the data center, it is about repurposing that into the data center to ensure organizations, even if they are attacked, that data is safe and secure. As you rightly said a few minutes back in your presentation, data is the oil, right? With it, while it is an asset, it comes with significant liabilities as well. So, having the ability to protect and then recover if the need comes is a significant challenge that organizations are struggling with today. And we see this example, we see examples of organizations struggling with this on a daily basis.
Yeah, and in fact, it dovetails into one of the other questions that I see here around how we handle security. Moving to cloud clearly is one of the solution benefits to customers as they look at that ransomware use case that you mentioned. And the question that we got was, what security standards do you employ for protecting data? And we're going to point you to our website, but I'll briefly describe. We want to combine the best of both worlds. We provide a public key infrastructure that encrypts data from its source all the way through transit and then in its long-term storage on our SaaS platform, which means ultimately that our customers are in control of both the security standards and the access to their data. In a world where we all understand that there have been suppliers that have abused that privilege, Druva has no visibility into your data without your permission. At the same time, as I've mentioned a couple of times, in that we store that data off network, off your corporate network. While you have access to the encryption keys, nobody at your site has access to the data storage. And this gives us this combined value of you being in control, but us also protecting you from internal or external attacks to your company. And this assurance, when it comes to Naveen's example from earlier, gives you the ability to certainly look back at clean copies, whether they are stored in a recent retention or a long-term retention with us that were inaccessible by a third party. So with that said, I think that we are out of time on the webinar today, and I want to thank Naveen for his time, and I would certainly like to thank our attendees for attending today and for your questions.
Excellent, excellent. Great webinar, a lot of great content. Thank you so much, Mike and Naveen. I really enjoyed the content. I hope that everyone on the event did as well. Before we go, I want to award our $300 Amazon gift card that is going out to Timothy Rollins of Arizona. Congratulations, Timothy Rollins of Arizona. We'll reach out to you to deliver your gift card. And before you go, I want to remind everyone to check out the resources, the handouts that are available there in the audience console. There's some really nice resources in there. I see the CIO's Guide to Cloud-First Data Protection, the Definitive Guide to Disaster Recovery Architectures, the Forrester Wave, and the Egan case study, all excellent resources. And then, of course, finally, make sure that you visit druva.com to sign up for your trial of Druva, do a proof of concept. Like Mike said, it only takes 15 minutes. See if it can help you out and help you to solve your data protection, your disaster recovery, and your compliance challenges. Again, thank you, Druva, and thank you everyone out there in the audience for joining today's event. Have a great day. See you next time.